What's going on, Elite fam? John here. Before we get started, why don't we just get this out of the way. If you're here and you're looking for specific information, you can check the description for timestamps to jump to the part of the video that applies to you. Even though this video leans more on the discussion side of things, I'm going to make sure to do my best to try to split up the video so that way you guys can just get what you need from it. In this video, I'm going to be talking about sound waves in particular, and we're going to be covering a very basic part of it. In this sense, I'm going to talk about basically anything that has to do with the volume aspect of sound. And I'm also going to show you guys how to interpret reading a sound wave so that way you know what you're looking at when you're looking at a sound wave. And the reason why I'm going over this has a lot to do with understanding how the plugins that I want to be talking about actually work and how you can eventually utilize these plugins to get the sound results that you're looking for. This, of course, is only going to be part one on this specific topic, so make sure you tune in to future videos where we'll go into more detail talking about sound waves and the other aspects involved with it. Lastly, be sure to tune in on November 6th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Elite Twitch channel. There I'll be hosting a masterclass kind of going over some aspects of audio engineering that will help people who are streaming understand audio a little better. And you'll also have an opportunity to ask me questions while I give a lecture, so please be sure to tune into that, and if you happen to miss it, we'll be posting it on the YouTube channel for you to look at your own leisure. Now that we got all the formalities out of the way, why don't we go ahead and just jump right in. Alright, so my goal with this video is to help you understand this thing at the corner of your screen right up here. This is called a waveform, and it's just a visual representation of a sound wave. I'm going to be using this waveform to help you better understand how these different filters in OBS work. And this little mini-series within a series talking about sound waves is going to help you understand them a little better so that you know what you're looking at. But in order to understand what a waveform is and what you're looking at to begin with, you first have to understand what a sound wave is. Simply put, a sound wave is the result of vibrations in the air. I don't know if you've seen the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, but you've probably noticed that every time there was any sort of shot that happened in space, there was no sound happening at all. This is meant to accurately represent what you would actually hear in space. You wouldn't hear anything. That's because there's no air in space. If there's no air to move, there's no vibrations that can be carried through the space itself, therefore you won't hear anything. It goes a little deeper than that. I would have to get into the physics of how your ears work. We're not going to go that deep into it, but if you understand how a microphone and a speaker works, it's actually not too dissimilar. In order to better explain how sound waves move through the air, I have to explain two different phenomena that happens whenever a sound wave is moving. The two phases I want to talk about are rarefaction and compression. Now, this animation that I've put up on the screen is actually meant to represent a speaker. And you'll notice that the front part of the speaker, which is usually that cone that you see, it's moving back and forth. Whenever a speaker is producing a sound, this is actually what it's doing. It's pushing air forward and backwards, essentially. Whenever it's pushing air forward, this is what we call the compression phase of a sound wave. Whenever it pushes air forward, it causes the air molecules to get close together, compresses them. And then whenever the speaker moves backwards, it pulls the air out and it causes the air molecules to get more separated. This is called the rarefaction phase. You may also consider the compression part of the sound wave to be called the high pressure part of the wave. You might also call the rarefaction part the low pressure part of the wave. The main reason why I need to help you make this distinction is because when you're looking at a waveform, you're looking at the waves going in an up and down fashion on the graph. It's essentially what a waveform is. It's pretty much just a graph layout representing how a sound wave actually moves through the air. The parts of the wave that go above the center line are what's considered the compression or the high pressure part of the wave. Whenever it goes below the line, that's the rarefaction or the low pressure part of the wave. Now, if you made it this far and you're still a little bit confused as to why I'm even talking about this, don't worry. I'm going to be getting to that in just a second. Now, there's so many aspects of a sound wave that we could be talking about. It's going to take multiple videos to fully cover everything. But when it comes to just understanding how OBS audio filters work, we really don't need to cover every single bit of how sound waves work. That's not really what I'm here to try to do. The parts of the sound wave that I want to cover in today's video pertain to what's called amplitude, or what you guys might consider to be volume. We're also going to be covering wavelength, which is pretty much the duration of a wave. And I also want to cover something called the envelope of the sound wave, or in some cases, what we might call the transient of a sound wave. All right, so the first thing I want to go over is wavelength. This is probably going to be the easiest thing to explain in this context, as we're only really talking about the volume side of things when it comes to waveforms. And I should also mention too that wavelength tends to have a pretty close relationship with frequency. And we're not going to be covering frequency in this video. That's going to be held for a later video once we get into talking about third-party plugins and things like EQs. So be sure to be subscribed to the channel so you can stay up to date whenever I upload that video. But putting it into the simplest terms that I can, wavelength simply refers to the duration of the waveform itself. Basically, if you're looking at the waveform like a graph, the bottom part of the graph itself is representative of time. The further out that goes, the more time the waveform occupies. I just wanted to get that out of the way, so why don't we move on to amplitude now. All right, so when we talk about amplitude, we're basically talking about how loud the audio is itself. And to very easily demonstrate this, I have prepared something that you guys can take a look at. This is a project that I have open in Adobe Audition. And what you're looking at is just a recording of me speaking some sort of line. I'll just go ahead and play it right now. What's going on, everyone? John the Zaz here, bringing you another repetitive line to listen to during an audio tutorial. Now, you've probably noticed that looking at this sound wave, that you've got various peaks and valleys. Some parts are a lot taller than others, some parts are fairly short. To understand amplitude, all you need to do is look at this waveform, and you can easily tell that the taller parts of this waveform are louder than the shorter parts. So when we talk about amplitude, we're talking about the height, essentially, of these peaks and valleys on the waveform itself. To demonstrate this volume difference, I'm going to go ahead and just play this part right here of the waveform. What's going on, everyone? Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to crossfade this a little bit, and you're going to notice that the audio kind of starts off quiet and then gradually gets louder. What's going on, everyone? John. Hopefully that demonstrates pretty well how amplitude works. Now there's a couple of other things I want to point out to you guys that is going to help you a lot, especially when you're trying to figure out how to set up your audio settings in OBS. If we look to the right side of this waveform over here, you see that there are some numbers going in the negative direction, starting from 0, going all the way down to what looks like 30, and then down to infinite right in the middle. It even continues that way on the other side. This little unit of measurement on the right-hand side is what we consider to be called decibels. Decibels are just a unit of measurement to measure perceived loudness of a particular sound wave. And understanding this is especially useful for setting up certain filters within OBS. I want to draw your attention to something at the bottom down here because it actually relates to decibels. If you look down at the bottom, there's a meter here. Whenever the sound wave is actually playing, you'll notice that that meter bounces up and down along with the wave. What's going on, everyone? John the Zaz here, bringing you another repetitive line to listen to during an audio tutorial. Now, this is important because OBS has one of these built into it, and it's actually an excellent way of helping you determine how loud your audio sources are. Before I go show you that in OBS, I want to draw your attention once again to that meter while this audio source is playing. But I want you to pay attention to the relationship of the audio source itself, so looking at the sound wave, while also noticing how it correlates with this meter down here. Everyone, John the Zaz here, bringing you another repetitive line to listen to during an audio tutorial. I wanted to draw your attention to this because if you looked closely enough, you've probably noticed that these sound waves correlate pretty closely to the decibel measurements on the right-hand side over here. Some of the louder peaks of this particular audio wave go up as high as -1 decibel, which is fairly loud in comparison to some of the other parts, which barely even hit 30. Now, if we head back over into OBS, you'll notice something. While I'm talking into OBS right now, you notice that that meter is bouncing up and down. When I speak quietly into it, it kind of, doesn't go up much. When I speak loudly, it goes up pretty high. That's what that meter is telling you. And if there's one thing that I have to praise OBS Studio for, is that they included decibel numbers on the right-hand side of that meter for you to reference. If you have it in the horizontal layout, of course, they'll be on the bottom right here. Personally, I like the vertical layout. Whenever you're trying to balance out your audio in OBS, this is probably one of the most important tools that you have. It'll do a lot to help save you some time, but also give you an idea of where your sound is what's called peaking, to kind of figure out how you need to set up most of your plugins. If you're hearing me use the term plugins and you have no idea what I'm talking about, it's basically the same thing as filters. That's just what us audio engineers tend to call things like that. But the main thing I want you to take away from this is that when you're looking at a waveform and you see those tall peaks, that basically just telling you what the amplitude is. And when you're looking at the meter in OBS, it's telling you the amplitude or the volume of the source that's going into OBS. And you can reference a lot of these things to kind of mix the volume difference between all of your different sources in OBS to try to get a nice audio balance. So hopefully this little demonstration of how amplitude works helps you understand that part of OBS a little better, and hopefully it can help you get some better sound results when you start balancing out your mix. Sorry for the change of clothes here. I'm re-recording this as I just simply wasn't happy with the explanation that I gave originally. This section we're going to be talking about envelopes. Now in the audio world, when we refer to envelopes, we usually talk about the acronym ADSR, which stands for Attack, Decay, Sustain, and Release. And these specific descriptors in the acronym refer to different points on the waveform. Now if we were going to go really deep on envelopes, I would be talking about every aspect of it, but for today we're only going to focus on attack and release. This is because a lot of the filters offered within OBS typically only have attack and release parameters as sliders on the filters. So if you guys want me to go even more in depth on envelopes in a future video, why don't you comment down below and let me know, and we'll cover a separate video on the entire subject. Now we're going to be using a totally different program entirely for this demonstration here. I'm going to be using FL Studio to demonstrate everything for you. To help you get a little acclimated with what I'm doing here on the screen, just to kind of show you around here. I've got this big window here labeled Edison, and that's going to show my waveform as I'm playing it. And we've also got our dB meter over here, so you can see the amplitude of the sound that I'm producing. And I'm going to be using an instrument called 3XOSC to generate what's called a square wave, which is just a type of pure wave that you can generate from an instrument like this. But the same general principle applies. It's going to look just like a really rigid type of waveform compared to the ones you were just looking at through the tutorial. But the same principles apply to it. When I just play a note here, you're going to see a waveform pop up. And you can see when we zoom in on this, that the waveform just kind of looks, as it's described, a square, kind of going up and down just like this. When I start playing around with the attack and release parameters within FL Studio, I can actually change the characteristics in the way that this waveform appears. Now, if we take a close look at the waveform over here, you notice that the very beginning goes from 0 to full volume almost immediately. This is what's known as a short attack or a fast attack. It goes from 0 amplitude all the way up to full amplitude immediately or in a short amount of time. And if we just take a look over at the end of the waveform over here, you notice that there's a little bit of a slope right at the end here. This is still considered a fairly fast release. It goes from full amplitude to 0 amplitude in a short amount of time. If we play the sound again, you'll notice that it comes in really quickly and it ends really quickly. You can even see that on the decibel meter over here on the left-hand side. I'm going to show you what a long attack and release looks like on the waveform by just simply adjusting some of the parameters here in FL Studio. You can see that I've got an envelope right over here on the right-hand side. Now, I'm not saying that in OBS Studio you're going to have parameters just like this, but the way that they function is very similar in terms of how the plugins will actually work. Now, I've adjusted some of the parameters here on the envelope to make it so that we take everything else out of the equation, and you can kind of just see exactly what attack and release is. I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to play a note from the oscillator, and you're going to see it appear right here in Edison. Now, if we take a close look at the waveform, that looks completely different from the one that we just saw over there. You notice that as we zoom in, the beginning of the waveform takes a little bit of time in order to get it to full volume. This is what we consider to be a long attack. Basically, when you increase the time of the attack, it'll take longer for it to achieve like the full effect or full volume. When we talk about release times, this is a fairly long release time as well. The longer the release time, the longer it's going to take for the waveform to get down to 0 volume. When you're adjusting plugins, you're usually adjusting with the release how long it takes for the effect to turn off. And to sort of hammer the point home, I'm going to make some adjustments to the attack. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of reduce the attack a little bit. I'm going to make the release a lot longer, and you're going to kind of see what I'm talking about. Of course, I shorten the attack a lot, and you can see that it takes much less time for it to reach full volume on the attack side, and on the release side, it takes much longer for it to get down to 0 volume. I'm going to clear out everything here in Edison, and I'm just going to kind of use some samples within OBS Studio to kind of demonstrate some different types of sounds that you might expect to have, you know, short attacks, long releases, and stuff like that. Now, this is just a cymbal right here. A hi-hat, we typically call it as the drums. This has a fairly short attack, and it might sound like it has a short release, but you can see waveform-wise that the release is fairly long. But I still consider this to be something that has both a short attack and a short release, just based on duration. And you can kind of hear it in the sound. Well, let's take a look at another sound here. This is a familiar sound for some of you if you know what an 808 kick drum sounds like. This has a very short attack and a long release. You can see that it takes a long time for the waveform to go down to 0 volume. And to sort of demonstrate long attack, short release right here, this is actually a reverse piano, and you can kind of hear it as it's playing, that the volume kind of starts out really quiet and swells up. I'll play it for you right now. And you can see in the waveform that it just sort of gradually comes up to full volume and then sharply dips down at the release side of things. This is just to kind of help you understand a little better what I'm talking about with attack and release, so you understand at least at what point in the waveform that attack and release are happening. And if you understand how attack and release work, you can understand how the parameters in OBS Studio actually work as well. And by just pulling up this compressor here in OBS Studio, you can see that a compressor, for example, will have an attack and release slider. If you watch my previous video when I explained all the different filters kind of at a glance, I explained that a compressor adjusts the volume of a waveform automatically. So when I talk about how a compressor works and we talk about attack and release, when we talk about attack, the attack basically tells how long it takes for the compressor to kick in to full volume reduction. And then when we talk about the release, we talk about how long it takes for the compressor to turn itself off. So you get no volume reduction at all. Even things like noise gates will have attack and release parameters as well, and those also affect the way that the effect happens. But of course, this kind of gets into some advanced parameter setting. It's not going to be the most essential thing that you need to learn with the plugins, but when we get to the other videos where I get more in depth with the plugins, I'm going to help you understand these a lot better. And that pretty much wraps up my explanation of envelopes. Now, to sort of tie a bow on this entire discussion that we're having here today, the main thing I want you all to take away from this is that when you're looking at the sound waves that I'm going to be presenting to you in future videos, they're there to help you understand what the plugins actually do within OBS. It's pretty easy to go to a YouTube video that claims to have Shroud's settings for his microphone, and you could go ahead and try to replicate that, but you'll quickly start to learn that those settings won't always work out. What needs to be understood is that whenever someone's setting up plugins for a particular person's like voice or whatever is going on in their stream, they're tailoring those plugins to achieve a certain sound that the person wants. And a lot of the times it's heavily influenced by the voice of the actual person or the type of audio that's being run through the OBS broadcasting software. Not everyone's going to be in the same audio situation. There are too many influences that can change the way that your audio sounds going into the program. And this is one of the main reasons why I felt that this approach is going to be the best and most beneficial to all of you. And moving forward, this is going to be one of the most essential tools towards helping you understand filters a whole lot better. That's just what wraps this video up, guys. I hope you all found it helpful. And if you did, please be sure to like, comment down below, and share it with your friends. This is just part one of a multi-part video. So be sure to tune in the future where I will follow up with this. Be sure to expect the next few videos to cover some of the various filters, so you guys don't have to wait very long for that. I'm sure you all are very excited about that. And of course, I highly encourage you all to leave your feedback down below. Let me know what you guys thought of the video. If there are any suggestions that you want to make as far as presentation, I'm all ears, and I'm paying attention to all of your feedback. Be sure to check the description down below for the various links to our various different social media channels. There's also a link to join the Elite Academy Discord. We here at Elite pride ourselves on helping educate streamers towards becoming better streamers, and we do so by giving practical advice that they could use to help improve their streams, whether it has to do with the technical side of things, whether it has to do with marketing. Maybe you want some advice on how to social network better. We cover all that stuff for you guys. We want to help make sure that you guys can become the very best. So if you're not a part of it already, please be sure to join the Elite Academy Discord and you get started as soon as possible. I appreciate y'all taking the time to watch the video. Thank you very much for watching, and have a pleasant day, everybody.